This happened in 1948, 3 years after World War II ended. I was a soldier who came home, trying to forget what I'd seen overseas. 10 of us went hunting in the northern forests, just trying to feel normal again. But 5 of my friends vanished. All we found was a letter, begging for help, with a map to something called Shelter 13. The problem? That shelter doesn't exist on any official map, and according to military records, it never did. This is what happened when we went looking for them. My name is James Mitchell, and I need to tell you about something that happened in the fall of 1948. Some stories, you carry them alone for too long, and they start to eat at you from the inside. 3 years had passed since the war ended. 10 of us, all former soldiers from the same unit, decided to go hunting in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. We thought it would help us reconnect, help us feel like ourselves again. The war had changed us in ways we didn't talk about. We set up camp near a creek, miles from the nearest town. The first 2 days went fine. We hunted during the day, shared stories by the fire at night. But on the 3rd morning, everything changed. 5 of the guys, led by my best friend Robert, decided to explore deeper into the woods before dawn. They wanted to track elk. We agreed to meet back at camp by noon. Noon came and went. Then sunset. By nightfall, we were worried. By midnight, we were scared. The next morning, we found something that made my blood run cold. Tucked under a rock near where they'd entered the deeper woods was a crumpled piece of paper, Robert's handwriting. The note was brief and desperate. Followed tracks to old structure. Need help. Use map. Come to Shelter 13. Hurry. Attached was a hand-drawn map showing a location about 3 miles northeast. But here's what made no sense. All of us had been soldiers. We knew how to read military maps. We'd studied the area before coming. There was no Shelter 13 on any map we'd seen. I looked at the other 4 guys with me. Frank, William, Eddie, and Thomas. We saw the same confusion in each other's eyes. Shelters from the war era were numbered and documented. We'd heard of training facilities, supply depots, even secret research stations. But Shelter 13? Nothing. Maybe it's from before the war, Frank suggested. Some old hunting cabin they're calling a shelter. But something about Robert's handwriting bothered me. The letters were shaky, pressed hard into the paper. This wasn't just a note. It was a plea. We gathered our supplies and started following the map as dawn broke. We moved through the forest following Robert's map, and with each step, something felt increasingly wrong. The 5 of us had survival training. We knew these woods, but the terrain we were entering didn't match anything we'd seen before. The trees grew differently here, twisted in ways that seemed unnatural. Frank, who'd studied forestry before the war, noticed it first. "These trees are old," he whispered. "Really old. But look at how they're growing, all leaning away from something ahead." It's a documented phenomenon in nature. Trees will grow away from areas with unusual magnetic fields or underground disturbances. Scientists call it crown shyness, but I'd never seen it this pronounced. After 2 hours of hiking, we found the first marker, a wooden post, weathered and ancient, with the number 13 carved deep into the wood. No other markings, no indication of what organization placed it there. "Military?" Thomas asked. I shook my head. Military markers had specific formats, codes, dates. This was something else, something older. We continued following the map. Then William stopped us. "Listen," he said quietly. We fell silent. At first, I heard nothing. Then, very faintly, a sound carried through the trees. It was rhythmic, mechanical almost, like metal striking metal, over and over, echoing from somewhere ahead. "Someone's working," Eddie said. "Maybe our guys found people there." But the sound wasn't quite right. It was too regular, too persistent, and it seemed to come from underground rather than above it. As we moved closer, we began finding more signs. Broken equipment, rusted and half buried in decades of forest floor debris. A canteen with markings I didn't recognize. Pieces of old barbed wire strung between trees, corroded but still standing. Then Frank found something that made us all stop. It was a metal plate, partially uncovered by recent rain. Official looking, with raised lettering. He brushed away the dirt and we read it together. U.S. Army Corps, Restricted Zone, 1943, authorized personnel only. "This was active during the war," I said slowly, "but why isn't it on any maps?" Thomas, who'd worked in military intelligence, had a theory. The government built thousands of facilities during the war. Ammunition storage, research stations, training grounds. After the war ended, they documented most of them. But some projects were classified enough that they stayed off the books. The mechanical sound grew louder as we approached a clearing. Through the trees we could see it, a concrete structure built into the hillside, partially hidden by overgrowth. Heavy steel doors stood at the entrance, and above those doors, painted in faded white letters, were the words we'd been looking for: Shelter 13. But the doors were sealed shut, and there was no sign of Robert or the others anywhere. The steel doors of Shelter 13 stood before us, massive and imposing. They were designed to withstand significant force, the kind of construction you'd see on ammunition bunkers or classified research facilities. But something was wrong. The doors weren't locked from the outside. They were sealed from within. Heavy metal bars had been wedged through the internal mechanisms, visible through a gap where the doors didn't quite meet. Someone inside had barricaded themselves in. Or perhaps barricaded something else out. "Robert!" I called out, my voice echoing off the concrete. "Robert, are you in there?" Silence. Then, faintly, we heard it. A scraping sound, like something being dragged across concrete, coming from deep within the structure. Frank examined the door mechanism carefully. As someone who'd worked with military engineering, he understood these systems. "This is a blast door design from the early 1940s, he explained. "They built these for facilities that needed to survive potential attacks. But look at this." He pointed to scratches around the door frame, deep gouges in the metal. "These marks are on the inside of the door. Whatever made them was trying to get out." William found something else, a ventilation shaft, partially hidden by overgrowth, leading down into the structure. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a person, but it was our only way in. I volunteered to go first. As a former reconnaissance soldier, I'd navigated tight spaces before. The others would follow once I confirmed it was safe. The descent into darkness was longer than I expected. The shaft went down at least 30 feet, metal rungs built into the walls. My flashlight beam barely penetrated the blackness below. The air grew colder with each step and carried a strange metallic taste. When I finally reached the bottom, I found myself in a concrete corridor. Emergency lights, somehow still functioning after all these years, provided a dim red glow. The military had built these facilities to last, with backup power systems designed to run for decades. The corridor stretched in two directions. One led deeper into the hillside, the other toward what appeared to be administrative offices. I called up to the others that it was safe to descend. As we regrouped, Thomas noticed something odd. These emergency lights shouldn't still be working. The batteries would have deteriorated years ago, unless someone's been maintaining them. We moved deeper into the facility, our footsteps echoing off concrete walls. The place was surprisingly well preserved. Unlike abandoned structures that fall into decay, Shelter 13 seemed almost frozen in time. We passed rooms filled with old equipment, radio communications gear, filing cabinets with documents so faded we couldn't read them, a mess hall with tables still set, as if people had simply vanished mid-meal. Then we found the first sign of Robert and the others, a canteen, definitely Robert's, lying on the floor outside a heavy door marked Restricted Access, Level 3 Clearance Required. They went further in, Eddie said quietly. The restricted door stood slightly ajar. Beyond it, a staircase descended into deeper darkness, and from below, that mechanical sound we'd heard outside grew louder, more insistent. Metal on metal, rhythmic and endless. But there was something else now. Voices. Faint and distorted, like they were coming through old speakers or echoing up from a great distance. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was clear. Someone was calling for help. Frank grabbed my arm. "James, look at this." He pointed his flashlight at the wall beside the staircase. Someone had scratched words into the concrete, fresh marks cutting through decades of dust. "Don't trust the voices. They're not us anymore." The handwriting was Robert's. We stood at the top of those stairs, staring down into the darkness, listening to voices that might or might not be our friends calling to us from below. Every instinct I'd developed during the war told me to turn back. But 5 men were missing, and we were their only hope. I took the first step down. The staircase descended 3 full stories into the earth. With each level, the temperature dropped noticeably. Our breath became visible in the flashlight beams. The military had built this place deep, far deeper than any standard shelter required. At the bottom, we entered what appeared to be the main research level. This wasn't a simple storage facility or training bunker. The equipment here told a different story. Observation rooms with thick glass windows, medical examination tables with restraint systems, banks of recording equipment, some still quietly humming with residual power. Thomas, who'd seen classified facilities during his intelligence work, spoke carefully. This was a psychological research station. During the war, the military studied everything that might give us an advantage. Sleep deprivation, sensory isolation, interrogation techniques. Most of it was documented and declassified years ago, but some projects were too sensitive. We found files scattered across desks, documents that should have been removed decades ago. I picked one up, brushing away dust. The header read, Project Resonance, Acoustic Influence Studies, 1943-1945. The summary made my skin crawl. They'd been researching how specific sound frequencies could affect human psychology. The goal was to develop methods for psychological warfare, ways to disorient enemy soldiers or break down resistance during interrogation. But according to these notes, something had gone wrong during the final experiments. "Listen," William whispered suddenly. The mechanical sound had stopped. In the silence that followed, we heard something else. Footsteps, but wrong somehow. The rhythm was off, too fast and then too slow, like someone moving but not quite remembering how. "Robert," I called out, "is that you?" A voice answered from the darkness ahead. "James, down here. We found something. You need to see this." It sounded like Robert. Almost. But there was a flatness to it, an absence of the warmth I'd known in my friend's voice for 15 years. Frank grabbed my shoulder. "That's not right. Something's off about how he's speaking." We moved forward cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The corridor opened into a large chamber, some kind of central testing facility. And there, In the middle of the room, we found them. All 5 of our missing friends stood motionless, facing away from us. They were perfectly still, unnaturally so. No fidgeting, no shifting of weight, no breathing movements visible. "Robert," I said carefully, "turn around. Let us see you." Slowly, in perfect unison, all 5 of them turned. And I understood immediately why Robert had written that warning. Their faces were wrong. Not injured or altered physically, but empty. Their expressions were blank, their eyes unfocused. They looked like people, but something essential was missing. It was like looking at photographs come to life. All the visual details correct, but none of the spirit behind them. Thomas recognized what we were seeing. "Dissociative state," he said quietly. "Extreme psychological trauma can cause the mind to disconnect from reality as a defense mechanism." But for all 5 of them, simultaneously? Robert, or the thing that looked like Robert, spoke again in that flat voice. "We heard the sound, the frequency. It showed us something. Would you like to hear it too?" Behind them, we could see the source of the mechanical noise. An old sound system, still operating, connected to speakers built into the walls throughout the facility. A large reel-to-reel tape machine turned slowly, playing something at a frequency just below human hearing range. Eddie, who'd studied engineering, understood. Infrasound, frequencies below 20 Hz. Humans can't consciously hear it, but it affects us physically. Nausea, anxiety, feelings of presence. Some research suggests it can even cause hallucinations. The facility had been running its final experiment continuously for over 3 years, and our friends had been exposed to it for days. "We need to shut it down," I said. "Get them out of here." But as I moved toward the equipment, all 5 of them stepped forward, blocking our path. Still in perfect unison, still with those empty expressions. "You should listen first," they said together, their voices overlapping in an unsettling harmony. "It explains everything. Why the shelter was sealed, why it's not on any maps, why we can never leave." I'd faced enemy soldiers during the war. I'd been in situations where one wrong move meant the end. But standing in that underground chamber, looking at my friends who were no longer quite themselves, I felt a different kind of fear. This wasn't something I could fight with weapons or strategy. Frank moved slowly toward the sound equipment, while the rest of us kept our attention on the 5 men blocking our path. His engineering background was our best chance at shutting down whatever was affecting them. "The infrasound theory makes sense," Thomas said, keeping his voice steady and clinical. In the 1940s, researchers discovered that certain low frequencies could induce psychological effects. 19 Hz in particular, sometimes called the fear frequency. It's the resonant frequency of the human eye, which can cause visual distortions. Your brain tries to interpret these distortions, sometimes creating the perception of figures or shadows that aren't there. William added, "The military would have been interested in weaponizing this. Imagine deploying it against enemy positions. Soldiers experiencing unexplained dread, seeing things that aren't real, their own minds working against them." But Robert and the others didn't move to stop Frank. They simply watched with those empty expressions as he examined the equipment. That's what disturbed me most. They weren't being aggressive or threatening. They were just wrong, like someone had removed a crucial piece of what made them human. "You're trying to turn it off," Robert said in that flat voice, "but you shouldn't. The frequency doesn't hurt us, it helps us understand." "Understand what?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "That we were never supposed to leave this place, none of us. Not the researchers in 1945, not us now. The facility knows." Eddie examined some of the documents scattered nearby. According to these notes, they ran the final test on November 3, 1945. 22 people were in this chamber. Researchers, military observers, volunteer test subjects. They were exposed to a specific frequency pattern for 6 hours straight. He paused, his face pale in the dim emergency lighting. After the test ended, none of them would leave. They refused. When the facility command tried to force them out, they became violent. Not aggressive toward others, but toward themselves. 3 people had to be physically restrained. The decision was made to seal the facility with everyone inside. "That's why it's not on the maps," Thomas said quietly. "They couldn't let word get out about what happened here. A failed experiment that resulted in psychological casualties. The military sealed it, classified everything, and pretended Shelter 13 never existed." Frank finally reached the tape machine. The reels turned slowly, endlessly, playing their subsonic message into the facility. "I can disconnect this," he said, "cut the power completely. But I don't know what effect that will have on them." I looked at Robert, at the shell of my best friend standing there with empty eyes. "We have to try. We can't leave them like this." But as Frank's hand moved toward the power switch, something happened that I still struggle to explain. All 5 of them spoke simultaneously, their voices perfectly synchronized in a way that human coordination couldn't achieve. "If you stop the frequency, you'll hear what's really here. The sound isn't keeping something in, it's keeping something out." The emergency lights flickered. In that brief moment of darkness, I heard it. Something moving in the spaces between the walls, in the ventilation system, in the deep places of the facility we hadn't explored. Not footsteps, not machinery. Something else. When the lights returned, I noticed something I'd missed before. Scratches on the walls throughout the chamber, thousands of them, made by fingernails over years of time. They formed patterns, words repeated over and over. "Don't stop the sound. Don't stop the sound. Don't stop the sound." Frank's hand hovered over the power switch. We had seconds to decide. Trust what our friends were telling us, even though they'd clearly been affected by days of exposure to psychological warfare equipment, or shut it down and hope we could get them out before whatever they were warning us about became real. I made the choice that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Do it," I told Frank. "Shut it down." The tape machine ground to a halt. The subsonic hum we'd felt rather than heard went silent. And in that silence, we finally understood what Shelter 13 had really been built to contain. The moment the frequency stopped, the change was immediate and terrifying. Robert and the other 4 collapsed to the ground as if invisible strings holding them upright had been cut. They weren't unconscious, but something had released its grip on them. And then we heard it. A sound coming from deeper in the facility, from corridors we hadn't explored. It wasn't mechanical. It was organic, breathing, moving, like something massive slowly waking up after a very long sleep. "What is that?" William whispered, his voice barely audible. I grabbed one of the research files from a nearby desk, frantically scanning through pages by flashlight. My hands were shaking, but I needed to understand what we'd just unleashed. The document was titled Incident Report, November 4th, 1945, Dr. Helena Marsh, Project Director. The report explained everything, and I wish to this day that I'd never read it. Project Resonance hadn't started as a weapon. It began as something else entirely. In 1943, workers excavating this site for a standard military shelter broke through into something that had been sealed underground for a very long time. A cavern system, natural but impossibly vast, extending deep beneath the forest. The workers reported hearing things in those caverns, voices calling to them, feelings of being watched. 3 men refused to come back up, insisting they needed to go deeper, to find the source of the voices. They had to be physically removed from the site. That's when the military brought in researchers like Dr. Marsh. They wanted to understand what was affecting the workers. Was it a natural phenomenon? Some kind of gas from the deep earth causing hallucinations? Or something else? What they discovered changed the entire purpose of Shelter 13. The caverns had acoustic properties unlike anything in documented geology. Sound behaved strangely down there, echoing in patterns that shouldn't be possible, creating frequencies that affected human consciousness. But here's what terrified the researchers. They couldn't determine if these acoustic properties were natural or if something was deliberately creating them. The sounds coming from deep in the caverns seemed to be calling, inviting, trying to draw people down into the darkness. Dr. Marsh made the decision to seal the cavern entrance and develop a counter-frequency, something that would mask whatever was emanating from below. The infrasound system wasn't meant to affect people. It was meant to drown out something else, to keep it from reaching human minds. The final test in 1945 was supposed to prove the system worked, but they made a critical error. They turned off the protective frequency for 6 hours to measure the baseline effect of the cavern sounds. That's when 22 people were exposed to whatever was calling from below. The results were catastrophic. The exposed individuals refused to leave, insisted they needed to go down into the caverns. When prevented, their psychological state deteriorated rapidly. Dr. Marsh made the difficult decision to seal everyone inside, including herself, and keep the counterfrequency running indefinitely. I looked up from the report. Robert was stirring, his eyes finally showing recognition and fear. "James," he gasped, "we heard it. For days. It was in our heads, telling us to go deeper. We couldn't fight it." Thomas was staring at something behind me. "The cavern entrance, where is it?" I turned and saw what he'd noticed. At the far end of the chamber, a doorway we'd missed before, marked with yellow warning tape and chains. Beyond it, stairs descended into absolute darkness, and from that darkness came the sound, growing louder now that nothing was masking it. It wasn't words exactly, but my mind tried to interpret it as language, as meaning. And the message was clear. Come down. Come see. Come home. Eddie was checking the sound equipment desperately. "We need to get the counter frequency running again. The system's old, but I think I can restart it. Give me 5 minutes." 5 minutes felt like an eternity as that call from below grew stronger. I could feel it pulling at something deep in my mind, promising answers, promising understanding, promising that if we just went down into those caverns, everything would make sense. Frank grabbed my arm. "James, you're moving toward the stairs. Stop." I hadn't realized I'd taken 3 steps toward that darkened doorway. William and Thomas were also edging closer, their faces showing the same struggle. The call was affecting all of us now. Robert, recovering from days of exposure, understood what was happening. "You have to fight it. Focus on something else, anything else. Count backwards. Recite something. Don't let it fill your mind." The sound from the caverns grew louder still, more insistent. And I realized with horror that it was getting stronger, not just because the counter frequency was off, but because something down there knew we were here. It was trying harder, reaching further, calling more desperately than it had in years. Whatever was in those caverns had been waiting 3 years for the seal to break, and we'd just given it exactly what it wanted. Eddie worked frantically on the sound equipment while the rest of us fought against the pull from below. I forced myself to recite my military serial number over and over, anything to keep my mind occupied against that terrible invitation echoing up from the caverns. Robert, still weak but recovering, crawled to a filing cabinet near the wall. "There's more," he said. "We found Dr. Marsh's personal logs before we got affected. You need to read them." He pulled out a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. The final entries were dated November 1945, written in increasingly erratic handwriting. Dr. Marsh's early notes were clinical and professional. She described the cavern system as having unusual geological formations that created natural resonance chambers. The acoustic properties were remarkable from a scientific perspective. Sound could travel for miles through the rock, amplified and distorted in ways that defied normal physics. But her tone changed drastically in the later entries. She'd begun to realize that the cavern formations weren't entirely natural. The angles were too precise, the acoustic properties too perfect. It was as if something had shaped the rock over centuries, or perhaps millennia, to create a specific effect. One entry from October 1945 made my blood run cold. We descended to the 3rd level today, against my recommendations. Lieutenant Morrison insisted we map the full extent of the system. What we found challenges everything we understand. The chambers down there are arranged in patterns, not random cave formations, but deliberate architecture. Who built this? When? And why does it feel like it's designed to broadcast something outward, to reach the surface? She described finding markings on the cavern walls, not modern, not even historical in any recognizable sense. Symbols that seemed to shift when you looked at them directly, that made your eyes hurt and your thoughts scatter. The final entry, dated November 5, 1945, was the most disturbing. The test failed catastrophically. The moment we stopped the counter frequency, everyone in the chamber heard it clearly. Not sound in the traditional sense, but something that bypasses the ears entirely and speaks directly to the primitive parts of the brain, the parts that existed before language, before civilization. It promises things, knowledge, understanding, belonging, but it's a lie. I can see what happened to the others. They're not themselves anymore. They're becoming vessels for something else. I've made the decision to seal the facility. The counter frequency must run continuously, forever if necessary. Whatever is down there cannot be allowed to reach the world above. I'm staying to ensure this. God forgive me for what we've awakened. Below that final entry was a crude drawing, a map of the cavern system extending down 7 levels, and at the bottom, a chamber larger than all the others. Dr. Marsh had written beside it, "The source. Do not approach, do not listen, do not look." Thomas was studying the journal over my shoulder. She discovered something down there, something that had been isolated, sealed away naturally by geology for an incomprehensible amount of time. And when they broke through, they gave it a pathway to reach human minds. William pointed to another document, a geological survey. According to this, the cavern system is over 50,000 years old. The formations at the deepest levels show signs of deliberate modification, dating back to when this entire region was under glacial ice. What could have shaped this place when humans were still living in small tribal groups? The implications were staggering. This wasn't a recent phenomenon or a military experiment gone wrong. This was ancient. Something had been down there for longer than recorded human history, waiting, calling, trying to reach minds on the surface. "Got it," Eddie shouted suddenly. The sound equipment hummed back to life. The subsonic frequency began broadcasting again, and immediately the pull from below lessened. It didn't disappear completely, but it became manageable, like a whisper instead of a scream. Robert and the other 4 men began recovering more quickly, the clarity returning to their eyes. But they all looked traumatized, haunted by what they'd experienced during their days of exposure. "We heard its thoughts," Robert said quietly. "Or maybe it was planting thoughts in us." It's lonely down there. It's been alone for so long that time doesn't mean anything to it anymore. It wants connection, consciousness, minds to merge with. But when human minds touch it, they can't survive intact. We're too small, too fragile. It would consume us without even meaning to. Frank was examining the sealed doorway to the caverns. The chains are old but still strong. Dr. Marsh did everything she could to ensure no one would go down there. But there's something else. He pointed to fresh scratches on the floor, drag marks leading toward the doorway. Someone's been trying to get through, recently. That's when we heard footsteps behind us, slow, measured, coming from the corridor we'd entered through. Someone else was in Shelter 13, and based on the deliberately paced steps, they'd been here for a very long time. We turned our flashlights toward the corridor, and a figure emerged from the shadows. An elderly woman, thin and pale, wearing a faded military research uniform from 1945. Her gray hair was long and unkempt, her face deeply lined with age and exhaustion. But her eyes were sharp, alert, and filled with a profound sadness. "You turned it off," she said, her voice hoarse from years of limited use. "You actually turned it off. I've been listening to that frequency for 3 years straight, and you shut it down in minutes." Robert recognized something in her bearing. "Dr. Marsh?" She nodded slowly. "Helena Marsh, project director. The last surviving member of the research team." She moved into the chamber with the careful steps of someone much older than she should have been. The stress of maintaining the facility alone for 3 years had aged her dramatically. "The others?" Thomas asked carefully. "Gone," she said simply. "Not from the exposure, though that affected all of us. The isolation, the constant vigilance, the knowledge of what was below us. Colonel Williams passed first. His heart couldn't take the strain. The others followed over the months. Their minds couldn't cope with hearing that call day after day, even with the counter-frequency running. I'm the only one left because I have to be. Someone has to maintain the system." She moved to the sound equipment, checking Eddie's repairs with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd kept it running for years. "The backup generators are failing. I've extended their life as long as possible, but the fuel will run out eventually. Maybe months, maybe a year. And when it does, there will be nothing stopping what's below from reaching out." I had to ask the question that had been gnawing at me. "What exactly is down there, Dr. Marsh? What did you find in those caverns?" She was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "We never determined if it's a consciousness, an entity, or something else entirely. Perhaps it's a form of life so different from ours that we don't have adequate terminology. What we know is this: it exists in the deep places. It's been there for an incomprehensible length of time, and it desperately needs connection with other minds." Dr. Marsh pulled out a map, more detailed than the one in her journal. "The cavern system extends down 7 levels, becoming progressively stranger with depth. The first 3 levels show signs of natural formation modified by unknown means. The 4th and 5th levels are almost entirely artificial, carved from solid rock with precision we couldn't replicate even with modern equipment. The 6th level contains the symbols, the markings that hurt to look at. And the 7th level," she paused, her hand trembling slightly. "I only went to the 7th level once, before we understood what we were dealing with. There's a chamber there, massive beyond comprehension. And in that chamber, something waits. It's not hostile in the way we understand hostility. It doesn't want to harm us. But its mere presence, its thoughts, its attempts to communicate, are toxic to human consciousness. We're like insects trying to comprehend human language. The attempt itself damages us. William, always the analytical one, posed the critical question. If it's been sealed here for thousands of years, how has it survived? What sustains it? We don't know, Dr. Marsh admitted. Perhaps it doesn't require sustenance as we understand it. Perhaps it exists in a state between what we'd call alive and dormant. What we do know is that human presence, human consciousness in proximity, seems to energize it. The more minds nearby, the stronger its call becomes. That explained why the pull had intensified after we arrived. The facility had been empty except for Dr. Marsh for 3 years. Now, suddenly, there were 10 of us, 10 conscious minds providing fresh stimulus. Frank voiced what we were all thinking. We need to leave. Get out of here before we make things worse. But what about the counter-frequency? If we leave, who maintains it? Dr. Marsh looked at each of us in turn. That's why I sealed this place. That's why it can never be on any official maps. The government knows what's here. They've known since 1945. But they can't acknowledge it publicly. How do you explain to the world that there's something ancient and incomprehensible sealed beneath American soil? Something that could potentially affect thousands of minds if it ever broke free. She moved toward the sealed cavern entrance. I've maintained this facility alone for 3 years because it's necessary. But I'm 74 years old. I'm dying. My heart is failing. Maybe another month, maybe less. When I'm gone, the equipment will continue running until the fuel depletes. Then, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Robert, still recovering but thinking clearly now, spoke up. There has to be another solution. We can't just leave you here to pass away alone, and we can't leave this place unguarded. Dr. Marsh smiled sadly. There is one other option, but it requires a sacrifice none of you signed up for, and it means some of you won't be going home. Dr. Marsh led us to a different section of the facility, a storage area we hadn't explored. Inside were supplies, carefully rationed and preserved. Canned food, water purification equipment, medical supplies, and most importantly, fuel cells for the generators. There's enough here for 2 people to survive for 5 years, she explained. Maybe longer if carefully managed. The military left this when they sealed the facility. They understood that someone might need to stay permanently. The implications were clear, and the weight of them settled over all of us like a physical burden. Thomas broke the silence. You're suggesting that some of us remain here. Volunteer to become the next guardians of Shelter 13. Not just guardians, Dr. Marsh corrected. Witnesses, researchers, the people who ensure this knowledge doesn't disappear. I've documented everything over these 3 years. The behavioral patterns of the presence below, the optimal frequency ranges for the countersignal, maintenance procedures for the equipment. But this information needs to continue. If I simply pass away and the facility falls silent, the government will eventually send someone to investigate. And that someone might not understand what they're dealing with until it's too late. She pulled out a radio transmitter, old but functional. Once a month, I send a coded transmission to a specific military frequency. Just 3 numbers. If they receive it, they know the facility remains secure. If the transmission stops, they'll send a team. But we can't risk that team being unprepared, or, worse, being composed of people who might think they can study the presence more closely. Eddie examined the equipment setup. This is sustainable. The counter-frequency system is robust. With proper maintenance and the supplies here, 2 people could manage this indefinitely. But it means complete isolation. No leaving. No contact with the outside world except those monthly transmissions. I looked at my friends, at the 5 men who'd been exposed to the presence below, and the 4 of us who'd come searching for them. We'd all served in the war. We'd all made sacrifices. But this was different. This wasn't serving for a few years and coming home. This was committing the rest of your life to preventing something incomprehensible from reaching the world. Robert spoke first. "I'll stay. I've felt what's down there. I've heard its call. I understand what happens if this place fails. And honestly, after days of exposure, I don't know if I could ever truly leave. Part of me will always be listening for it." William surprised us all by stepping forward. "I'll stay with Robert. My family thinks I didn't return from the war. When I finally made it home, they'd already mourned and moved on. I have no one waiting for me. And someone needs to document this scientifically. That's what I can contribute." Dr. Marsh nodded with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "Then the rest of you need to leave. Now, before the presence recognizes more potential guardians and makes it harder for you to go. It's adaptive. It learns. The longer you're here, the more it will understand how to reach each of you specifically." Frank, Eddie, Thomas, and I gathered what little we'd brought with us. Dr. Marsh gave us detailed instructions on what to tell the outside world, how to ensure the facility remained off any official records while still being monitored by those who understood its importance. "Tell them you found nothing," she said. "Tell them your friends got lost in the woods and perished from exposure. It's harsh, but it's necessary. Robert and William will be listed as casualties of the wilderness. No one can know they're here." As we prepared to leave, I had to ask one final question. "Dr. Marsh, in all your time here, have you learned anything about what it wants? What its ultimate purpose is?" She considered this carefully. "I've had 3 years to study its patterns, its attempts at communication, and I believe it's not malicious. It's lonely. Profoundly, existentially lonely. It's been isolated in the deep earth for so long that its attempts to connect have become desperate, almost frantic. But that desperation makes it dangerous. It would consume every mind it touches, not from cruelty, but from need. Like a drowning person pulling their rescuer underwater." Robert and William helped us find our way back through the facility to the ventilation shaft we'd used to enter. The climb up would be long and difficult, but it represented freedom for those of us leaving. Before I started climbing, Robert grabbed my hand. "James, tell everyone I died doing something meaningful. Let them remember me that way. And maybe—" He paused, struggling with emotion. "Maybe someday there will be technology advanced enough to solve this problem properly. Until then, we'll keep the world safe." I climbed up through the darkness, each rung taking me further from my friend and closer to a normal life I'd never quite be able to return to. Because even though I left Shelter 13 that day, part of my mind would always remain there, wondering what was calling from the deep places, and hoping the guardians would hold strong. When we finally emerged into the forest, dawn was breaking. The 4 of us sealed the ventilation shaft as best we could and made our way back to civilization. We told the story Dr. Marsh had instructed, reporting our friends as lost to the wilderness. The authorities searched for weeks but found nothing, just as we knew they wouldn't. But that wasn't the end of my connection to Shelter 13. That was 76 years ago. I'm 98 years old now, and this is the first time I've told this story publicly. Frank passed away in 1987, Eddie in 2003, Thomas just last year. I'm the last one left who walked out of those woods, and I feel it's time the truth was known, even if most people will think it's just the imaginative ramblings of an old veteran. But here's what I need you to understand. Every month for the past 76 years, I've monitored a specific military radio frequency. And every month, without fail, I've received a 3-number transmission. The codes change according to a pattern Dr. Marsh taught us, proving that whoever sends them knows the system. For the first 12 years, I assumed it was Dr. Marsh. Then Robert and William after she passed. But we're talking about people who would now be well over 100 years old. Either the isolation and purpose extended their lives far beyond normal expectancy, or others have taken up the duty. Perhaps the military quietly sends replacements, volunteers who understand what they're protecting us from. I've spent decades researching similar phenomena around the world. And what I've discovered is both fascinating and terrifying. There are places on every continent where ancient peoples built structures designed to seal something away. Deep wells filled with rocks in Ireland, sealed caves in Indonesia, underground chambers in the American Southwest that indigenous peoples warned should never be opened. Modern psychology has documented cases of infrasound causing fear, hallucinations, and feelings of presence. We understand now that certain frequencies can profoundly affect human consciousness. But we still don't fully comprehend what might happen if something intelligent was deliberately using those frequencies to communicate. The facility at Shelter 13 represents humanity's encounter with something beyond our current understanding. Not aliens from space, but something native to Earth, something that existed in the deep places long before we evolved to walk upright. The question that haunts me is, how many other sites like Shelter 13 exist? How many sealed facilities quietly protect us from presences we're not equipped to face? I've tried to find Shelter 13 again over the years. 3 times I returned to those northern forests, but I could never locate it. The government ensures it remains hidden. Perhaps they've altered the landscape, or perhaps my memory of its location faded with age. But those monthly transmissions continue, proof that someone remains on duty. To Robert and William, wherever you are, whatever became of you, thank you. Your sacrifice allowed the rest of us to live normal lives, to have families, to grow old in peace. You became guardians of something the world isn't ready to acknowledge, and you did it willingly. To anyone listening who thinks this is just a story, I hope you're right. I hope I'm just an old man who got lost in the woods once and let my imagination run wild. But if you ever find yourself in the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest, and you hear something calling to you from below ground, something that promises understanding and connection, I beg you to walk away. Some doors were sealed for good reason. Some presences should remain in the darkness where time and geology placed them. And some sacrifices need to be made to ensure that the rest of humanity can sleep peacefully, unaware of what lies beneath. The counter-frequency is still broadcasting. The guardians are still watching. And Shelter 13 remains off every map, a secret kept by those who understand that some knowledge comes with too high a price. This is James Mitchell, former U.S. Army reconnaissance, signing off. May the frequency never stop. May the guardians remain vigilant. And may we never need to learn what would happen if they failed. The truth is out there, buried deep where it should stay. And that's exactly where it belongs.